dwarf is only the head of the party and the army, not of the state. His father's head of the state. Father's dead now, has been dead for some years, but he's still the head of the state and will be forever. North Korea is therefore what one might call, I tried to call, a necrocracy, or a mausolocracy, perhaps, or a thanatocracy. And you have the right only to praise and adore and thank for every single thing that you get. You owe thanks to these people. That's what it would feel like. The most unending pointlessness, the most unending nothingness, nullity, smashing of the personality, destruction of everything that counts as self-respect or dignity. But at least you can die and get out of North Korea. And you cannot do this with Abrahamic religion, which I therefore renounce as something essentially evil. Now, one consequence of its man-made character, and one way of demonstrating beyond very much doubt that it is man-made, is its proliferation. We have, I think, two choices here. Either man-made God or God-made man. If it's the former, nothing much remains to be explained. If it's God-made man, it's very hard to see why there are so many religions and why they're constantly at war with one another. Make the opposite assumption that man has invented religion and God. Nothing is left to be explained. There is no mystery. There are, of course, innumerable proliferating cults, sects, confessional discrepancies, warring churches, schismatic groups. Most of the violence in Iraq, as we know, is not directed at our own brave soldiers and their allies among Iraqis, but at other Iraqis by other Muslims, who think it's cultural to blow up each other's mosques, something a secularist would never agree to do, to blow up, say, the Golden Dome at Samarra. We know from pre-monotheistic times, we know from Sophocles and Antigone, that any person of ordinary morality has a natural resistance to desecration, to profanity. We wouldn't do that. We would leave it to the religious to do it, which you always can. The last time American troops were needed in a context like this, it was because the Christians of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia were tearing each other's throats out, burning each other's churches, killing each other's children, all of it with a divine warrant, all of them, every last one of them, a faith-based. On that occasion, the Muslims were the most civilized people in the case. It doesn't make any difference. Almost everybody gets, as it were, their turn at bat to be the most intolerant among religious. But to say that this is man-made, it seems to me to say something that's almost obvious. Now, I'm saying all this.
About a minute.
Okay, I'm saying all this in the United States, where I must now say something I've been waiting for months to say, actually years to say, my fellow Americans. Thank you. I sometimes think you don't understand how lucky you are. Yours is the country that has the only constitution ever written that absolutely insists on the separation of these ideas from the state. When the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut wrote to Mr. Jefferson calling for a wall of separation, they were worried about what? Who did they think was going to persecute them? The Congregationalists of Danbury, Connecticut was the one they were afraid of. And rightly so, because the Congregationalists would have given them a really hard time if they'd been allowed to, if they could have seized any local power. This fighting, not just about religion, but between the religious, this desire to have the freedom not just of religion, but from religion, is enshrined in the founding documents of this country in a way that should make you very proud. And it should therefore put you very much on your guard that there are people who don't seem content with it, who seem always to wish to impose their own religious belief on this. To say, if only we could ban alcohol, as in the 20s, we'd have a more pure and perfect union. If only we could forbid the teaching of evolution, or get equal time for pseudoscience, like the alchemy class that follows the chemistry period in, presumably, these schools. Or the astrology class that comes after the astronomy studies moment. Everything will be fine. Resist this with every fiber of your being. Join me, in fact, in my new favorite slogan. Mr. Jefferson, build up that wall. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Hitchens, thank you. Dr. Olasky, your move.
Well, I share Christopher's concern about round-the-clock surveillance, but I need to point out that we are in Texas, and we tend to sing in almost a ritualistic fashion. The eyes of Texas are upon you. You cannot get away. You may think you can escape them. Rise up early in the morn. The eyes of Texas are upon you until Gabriel blows his horn. The religious sentiment there is something that a lot of us do believe in. In other ways, we have certainly a separation of church and state, although certainly not a separation of university and football. I'll rebut some of your specific statements later on, but I want to start with the big picture. When the second terrorist airplane on 9/11 hit the World Trade Center, ABC's Diane Sawyer was speechless for a moment, and then she uttered a soft, "Oh my God." And that, I suspect, is what a lot of us said, and the question is, are we crazy? I appreciate your guts in defending the war against terror. You've taken a lot of heat for that. I also appreciate your remarkable accomplishments in both speaking and writing. As for me, I'm just a writer. I really am. I've been in about 3 debates in 15 years. I tend to sit with my laptop and try to think things through, so I hope you'll all excuse me if I work off some notes here. I'm a writer, not a talker. And with a limited amount of time, I don't want to wing it. So let me start with a confession. When Evan here pushed me to take on this debate, I finally agreed, as you'll recall, but I predicted that Christopher would wipe the floor with me. But now, having read his book, having listened to him, I'm more optimistic. The change is not because of my oratorical ability. No, it's you know, my oratorical ability is minimal, but you have a weak case. And of course, some people motivated by religion have done all kinds of terrible mischief and mayhem. Of course, that's irrefutable. But then you go and insist in the subtitle of your book, and throughout it, that religion poisons everything. And that's a hard charge to prove, I think. Everything? Everything? It sounds improbable. Are 1.3 billion Muslims all murderers? Are 1 billion Hindus all nutty? Might Judaism and Christianity have produced maybe 50% good and 50% evil? If not, how about 45% good? Well, 40%, 30%, 20%? Will not Christopher relent from his anger if there's 10%? That's good. I've gone page by page through this book. It's a delightful book to read, especially preparing for debate because of all the extreme statements. I could just lay it out page after page after page, but that would be a very dull presentation. There's also Texas wisdom, you know, if you don't strike oil within 20 minutes, stop boring. So I'm going to challenge just a few representative points. On page 4, Christopher, you write that religion produces a maximum of servility. All religions? With that enormous variety of religions in the world that you pointed out, do generalizations like that make sense? And just looking at the Bible, you read it through, were Abraham and Moses and David and Job, were they servile? I mean, they all argued with God at various times. They weren't servile. On page 7, you write that religion spoke its last intelligible or noble or inspiring words a long time ago. You know, Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches, with all their biblical imagery, were certainly inspiring. Many students I had heard the Dalai Lama when he spoke here, and they were inspired. And Pope John Paul II's words inspired many people to rise up against communism in Eastern Europe. On page 17, you write that religion does not have the confidence in its own various preachings even to allow coexistence between different faiths. You know, there's an annual pro-life march in Washington, not far from your home. There are over 100,000 Catholics and Protestants every year. They walk side by side along with groups from Jews for Life, Buddhists for Life, and so forth. On page 32, you write that the 19 suicide murderers of New York and Washington and Pennsylvania were beyond any doubt the most sincere believers on those planes. Well, you know, Todd Beamer, the man who said, "Let's roll," on United Flight 93, and he and others made sure it didn't crash into the U.S. Capitol. You know, he was a strong, sincere Christian believer. We did a profile of an interview with his wife and so forth afterwards in World Magazine, and the others who stopped the terrorists. There were a lot of believers there. And they died when Flight 93 crashed in Pennsylvania. You go on. I'll skip to page 102.